What finally made you go full bridezilla at someone else's wedding? When I found my 6-year-old disabled nephew locked in a hot car during my sister's outdoor ceremony. I'd noticed his wheelchair wasn't at the ceremony, but my mom said he was resting inside because the heat was too much for him. Something felt wrong though. During the vows, I slipped away to check on him. I searched the bridal suite, the venue's quiet room, even the kitchen. Nothing. That's when I heard it. This weak crying sound coming from the parking lot. I found Lucas locked in my sister's SUV, windows up, no AC, strapped in his special needs car seat, drenched in sweat. The thermometer on my phone showed 97 degrees outside, which meant it was probably 120 in that car. His lips were cracked and white. His medication alarm had been going off for who knows how long, and he'd wet himself probably hours ago. His feeding tube had come loose and formula was everywhere, mixed with vomit. I smashed the window with my heel to get him out. When I carried him back toward the venue, the wedding coordinator tried to stop me. The ceremony is still happening, she whispered. You can't interrupt. I asked her if she knew there was a disabled child locked in a car. She looked away and said my sister told her he was better off napping and to ignore any noises. I walked straight to the reception tent with Lucas barely conscious in my arms. His head kept falling backward in this terrifying way, and when I tried to give him water from my flask, it just dribbled out of his mouth. My sister Ashley was taking photos with her new husband Brad when she saw me. The photographer kept snapping as her face went from confused to angry. What are you doing? She hissed. He was fine. He likes the car. It's his safe space. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Our mom rushed over and said I was making a scene over nothing, that Lucas doesn't feel heat like normal kids because of his cerebral palsy. My aunt grabbed my arm and said family doesn't air dirty laundry in public. Then my Uncle Jim, who's a doctor by the way, glanced at Lucas and just shrugged. Kids are resilient, he said, then went back to his champagne. My own cousin took out her phone to film me, not to help, but because she said I was being psycho again. Brad, the new husband, walked over all calm and said, maybe it's time we consider a facility for him anyway. This is too much for Ashley to handle. That's when I realized this wasn't neglect. This was intentional. I started calling other family members who couldn't make the wedding, and when I called my grandma, she said something that made everything click. Turns out Ashley had been asking about Dad's will. You see, when my dad died 2 years ago, he left everything in a trust for Lucas's care, with Ashley as the trustee. If something happened to Lucas, Ashley would inherit everything, almost $500,000. When I confronted Ashley again, she rolled her eyes. You're so dramatic, she said. He's fine. Look, he's not even crying anymore. She was right. Lucas had gone quiet, his eyes rolling back, this white foam at the corners of his mouth. That's when Brad stepped in with his lawyer voice. You need to calm down. You're creating liability issues for the venue. If you don't stop this right now, we'll have security remove you. The wedding planner actually started walking toward me with 2 security guards. My own mother said, please don't ruin your sister's special day. We can discuss this later. Then Ashley leaned in close and whispered something I'll never forget. Dad should have left it all to me anyway. Lucas will never know the difference. That's when I knew I had to go nuclear. I took Lucas straight to my car and drove to the ER, still in my bridesmaid dress. The triage nurse took one look at him and rushed us to the back immediately. His core temperature was 103.8. The doctor said another 30 minutes could have caused permanent brain damage or death. They started IV fluids and cooling protocols while documenting everything. The dehydration, the missed medications, the heat stroke symptoms, the fact that he'd been restrained and couldn't free himself. But then the doctor found something else. Bruising on his ribs consistent with being struck, and old injection sites that didn't match his medical records. How long has he been in your sister's care? She asked. When I said 2 years since Dad died, her face went pale. We need to do a full skeletal survey, she said. The x-rays came back showing healed fractures, 3 of them, all at different stages of healing. This combined with the hot car evidence made the doctor's face go dark. This is attempted murder, he said, and called the police himself. 2 officers took my statement while Lucas was stabilized. I gave them every bit of evidence I had, from the wedding coordinator's words to the bit about Dad's will. They called for additional units and a CPS emergency response team. We returned to the venue just as they were cutting the cake. I walked in first, still in my bridesmaid dress, now covered in Lucas's urine and sweat. Behind me came 2 uniformed officers, a detective, and the CPS investigator. The music stopped. All 200 guests turned to stare. Ashley's perfect wedding became a crime scene. She was arrested in her wedding dress. Brad tried to argue jurisdiction and threatened lawsuits, but the detective shut him down with one sentence. Sir, we have evidence of attempted murder of a disabled child. The whole tent went quiet, except for the sound of handcuffs clicking around Ashley's wrists. Guests started pulling out their phones and recording everything while Brad kept yelling about lawsuits and false arrest. The detective told him to step back or he'd be arrested too for obstruction. Ashley started crying these fake tears, telling everyone I was jealous of her happiness and making things up about Lucas. The wedding coordinator tried to slip away, but the detective stopped her and said she'd need to give a statement. My mom rushed over to Ashley and kept saying this was all a mistake, that I didn't understand how hard it was to care for a disabled child. The CPS investigator took photos of the whole scene while guests whispered and stared. Some of Ashley's friends started shouting at me that I ruined everything. My Uncle Jim finally put down his champagne and walked over to the detective, trying to use his doctor status to smooth things over, but the detective shut him down fast. They took Ashley away in the police car while she screamed at me through the window. Brad followed in his Mercedes, already on the phone with what sounded like every lawyer in the state. The rest of the family just stood there looking at me like I was the villain. I went back to the hospital where Lucas was hooked up to so many machines. The detective found me in Lucas's room around midnight and asked if I wanted to press charges against the wedding coordinator too, since she admitted knowing Lucas was in the car. My brain was so fried I couldn't even think straight. Lucas was stable but still on oxygen, and his little chest kept making these rattling sounds when he breathed. I hadn't left his room in 12 hours except to use the bathroom. The nurses brought me cafeteria food, but I couldn't eat. I just sat there holding Lucas's hand and watching the monitors. The next morning, my mom showed up with a lawyer she'd hired for Ashley. She tried to tell me this was all a big misunderstanding about Lucas's special needs, that Ashley just didn't know how hot cars get. The lawyer was this older guy in an expensive suit who kept talking about how we could make this all go away if I just dropped the charges. He said Ashley was a loving caretaker who made one mistake and that Lucas didn't need to lose his guardian over this. Mom kept nodding along and saying family should stick together. The lawyer started talking about defamation and false accusations, saying I could be sued for ruining Ashley's wedding and reputation. That's when the detective walked in carrying a folder. He pulled out printed text messages between Ashley and Brad from 3 days before the wedding. The messages talked about the Lucas problem and how to handle it permanently. One message from Brad said they should look into facilities, but Ashley wrote back that it would be faster to just let nature take its course. The lawyer's face went white when he read them. Mom started crying for real this time. The detective said they found these on Ashley's phone during booking, and there were dozens more going back months. Child Protective Services showed up that afternoon with Morgan Boswell, who immediately started taking photos of every bruise and mark on Lucas's body. She had me help her turn him gently so she could document everything. She told me they were opening an emergency investigation and would need to interview everyone who had access to Lucas over the past 2 years. She made a list of names including family members, therapists, and anyone else who spent time alone with him. Morgan said the evidence was overwhelming and asked if I'd be willing to take emergency custody. Dr. Esther Bracken pulled me into the hallway while Morgan was working. She showed me Lucas's brain scans on her tablet and pointed to several dark spots. She explained these were signs of previous oxygen deprivation incidents, at least 3 separate times based on the scarring patterns. This wasn't the first time Lucas had been left in dangerous conditions, just the first time someone had intervened. She said one of the incidents looked about 6 months old, another from a year ago. The damage was permanent, but Lucas had been lucky so far. Another incident could have killed him or left him in a vegetative state. The hospital social worker brought me a stack of paperwork for emergency temporary custody of Lucas. My hands shook as I signed each page. I knew this meant taking on his complex medical needs, the feeding tube, the medications, the therapy appointments, the special equipment. The wedding coordinator actually tried to stop her from saving a dying child because it might interrupt the vows. That's some next level dedication to keeping the schedule. Too bad it wasn't matched by basic human decency. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment and worked full time. I had no idea how I was going to manage, but I signed anyway. The social worker said CPS would provide resources and support. She gave me pamphlets about respite care and disability services. That evening, Ashley called from jail. Against my better judgment, I answered. She didn't even say hello, just started screaming that I'd ruined her life and destroyed her marriage. She said Lucas was never supposed to survive this long anyway because of his disabilities. That the doctor said he wouldn't make it past 3, but here he was at 6, still draining everyone's energy and Dad's money. She called him a burden and said I'd find out soon enough what a mistake I was making. She said Brad was going to leave her now and it was all my fault. I hung up and immediately went to find the detective. He was still at the hospital interviewing staff. I told him about Ashley's call and what she said about Lucas not supposed to survive. He said they were already pulling Ashley's phone records going back 2 years to establish a pattern. He mentioned they'd found searches on her computer about how long someone could survive in a hot car and whether brain damage from heat stroke could look accidental. The next day, Ophelia Boudreau from the trust management company called me. She explained that Ashley had been withdrawing the maximum amount allowed every month, but couldn't account for where the money went. The receipts Ashley provided didn't match the withdrawals. About $200,000 was missing with no explanation. Ophelia said she'd been suspicious for months, but needed legal cause to investigate further. Now with the criminal charges, she could freeze the accounts and audit everything. 3 days later, Brad posted bail for Ashley. They showed up at the hospital that afternoon despite the restraining order the judge had issued. Security tried to stop them at the main entrance, but Brad pushed past, saying he had rights as Lucas's stepfather. Ashley was screaming that she wanted to see her nephew. They made it to the pediatric floor before security caught up. Brad kept shouting about parental rights and threatening to sue the hospital for denying access. Security had to physically drag them to the elevator while other families watched in shock. Ashley screamed that I'd regret this and that she'd get Lucas back no matter what it took. The detective came back to Lucas's room about an hour later with his laptop open. He turned the screen toward me and showed me Ashley's search history from her home computer. There were dozens of searches about how long it takes for someone to die in a hot car, what temperature causes heat stroke in children, and whether disabled kids feel pain differently. The searches went back 6 months. Some were from the middle of the night. She'd even looked up whether car windows can be opened from inside by a child in a wheelchair. The detective said this proved she'd been planning this for months. Morgan from CPS arrived while he was showing me the evidence. She had a thick folder and started her assessment right there in the hospital room. She watched how I held Lucas's hand and how he calmed down when I talked to him. She asked me about my job, my apartment, my support system. Then she said Lucas should come home with me as soon as the doctors cleared him. She started listing everything I'd need to learn. His feeding tube needed cleaning 4 times a day. He had 7 different medications on different schedules. Physical therapy exercises had to be done every morning and night. She handed me pamphlets about special needs care and said a nurse would come to my apartment to train me. My hands started shaking. I excused myself and went to the bathroom down the hall. I sat on the floor next to the toilet and just lost it. I didn't know anything about taking care of a disabled kid. What if I messed up his medications? What if his feeding tube got infected? What if I couldn't lift him properly and hurt him? A nurse found me crying on the bathroom floor. She sat down next to me and said she'd seen this before with emergency placements. She gave me the number for a support group and said the hospital would arrange training before Lucas left. She helped me stand up and walked me back to his room. My phone was buzzing with messages. Grandma had called 3 times. When I called her back, she was sobbing so hard she could barely talk. She said she should have said something sooner. Ashley had been asking her weird questions for months about life insurance for disabled children. She'd asked if policies paid out if the child died from natural causes versus accidents. Grandma thought Ashley was just worried about Lucas's future care costs. She kept saying she was sorry over and over. While I was on the phone with Grandma, my email pinged. The wedding photographer had sent me a huge file. She'd taken photos constantly during the ceremony, even when she wasn't supposed to. The timestamps showed exactly when I left my seat at 2:47 p.m. and when I came back carrying Lucas at 3:19 p.m. She'd even caught Ashley's face when she saw me with Lucas. Pure rage, not concern. The photos would prove the timeline to any jury. Lucas started stirring in his hospital bed. His eyes opened slowly, and he looked around the room. When the nurse said Ashley's name to check his response, he immediately started crying and trying to pull away. His whole body went rigid. The child psychologist who came to evaluate him said this showed clear trauma association. She'd never seen such a strong fear response to just hearing someone's name. She documented everything for the case file. My phone rang and it was my boss. I explained what had happened and that I needed time off. He said to take whatever I needed, but reminded me I only had 8 days of paid leave left. After that, it would be unpaid. I'd have to figure out money later. Lucas needed me now. The detective called me the next morning with more news. He'd been digging into Brad's finances and found something huge. Brad had helped Ashley take out 3 different life insurance policies on Lucas from 3 different companies. Each one was for $500,000. None of the companies knew about the others. That's insurance fraud on top of everything else. The policies were all taken out in the last year after Brad and Ashley started dating. One had been approved just 2 weeks before the wedding. Mom showed up at the hospital that afternoon. She looked terrible, like she hadn't slept at all. She sat down and started talking without me even asking. She said she'd noticed bruises on Lucas before.